welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. This week, our subject is Catherine Parr. Back to Catherine. Catherine told Seymour that she had prayed many times to get out of this marriage with the king. As most English people believed the king was the head of the church, if King Henry thought he should be married, then God thought so too. So she put her own needs and wants aside and went with the king's needs and wants, believing, although it wasn't what she wanted, it was her fate, predetermined by God. On becoming queen, Catherine installed her former stepdaughter, Margaret Neville, as her lady-in-waiting, and gave her cousin Maud and her stepson, John's wife, Lucy Somerset, positions in her household. She kept her maiden name, signing letters Catherine Parr, even when she was the queen. Catherine was partially responsible for reconciling Henry with his daughters from his first two marriages, and also developed a good relationship with Henry's son Edward. When she became the queen, her uncle, Lord Parr of Horton, became her Lord Chamberlain. Nepotism. She was down. Henry seemed enamored with Catherine, calling her sweetheart and allowing her to sit on his lap. Allowing her. How kind of him. He was trying to get back to his roots as a Renaissance man, writing her poetry. Remember this writer when you do pray, for he is yours, none can say nay. More of a limerick, it seems, but Shakespeare wouldn't be born for another 20 years. He allowed her to buy excessive amounts of clothing. One year, she bought 47 pairs of shoes. So that's #goals. She enjoyed taking milk baths. She loved perfume and lozenges. For the time, she smelled wonderfully. She wasn't as educated in being at court as the well-traveled Anne Boleyn had been, but she was very intelligent and educated by her mother, who ran the finishing school, so she made it work. Parr's Psalms and Prayers, taken out of the Holy Scriptures, was printed by the king's printer in 1544 when she was 31 years old. I need to pause for a moment because this was a big deal. She was a published female author at only the age of 31 in a heavily patriarchal 16th century England. Also, it was a religious book in a time where both Protestants and Catholics were killing each other in the name of religion. Parr's volume appeared as preparations for war were being finalized, and it served as a powerful piece of wartime propaganda designed to help Henry win the war against France and Scotland via the prayers of his people. The volume contains 17 psalms, focused largely on defeating enemies, and it concludes with a prayer for the king, derived from a prayer for the Holy Roman Emperor, and a prayer for men to say entering into battle. A translation of a prayer by Erasmus. Parr paid for deluxe gift copies of the book, which were distributed at court. And the 9th psalm was set to pre-existing music by Thomas Tallis, and was likely performed as part of a special wartime ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral. Parr's A Prayer for the King had an important afterlife. In 1559, 15 years after it was first published, it was edited and inserted into the Book of Common Prayer, probably by Queen Elizabeth I, who, spoiler alert, was then Supreme Governor of the Church of England. This prayer remains in the Book of Common Prayer and is still used to pray for the British monarch by Anglican communities around the globe. The prayer goes like this. O Lord, our Heavenly Father, high and mighty, King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all the dwellers upon the earth. Most heartily we beseech thee with thy favor to behold our most gracious sovereign Lady Queen Elizabeth, and so replenish her with the grace of thy Holy Spirit, that she may always incline to thy will and walk in thy way, and do her plenteously with heavenly gifts. Grant her in health and wealth long to live. Strengthen her that she may vanquish and overcome all of her enemies, and finally, after this life, she may attain everlasting joy and felicity through Jesus Christ our Lord. At the time of this recording, Lady Queen Elizabeth would be replaced with King Charles III. Following him will be King William V and then King George VII. Henry went on his last campaign to France from July to September 1544, leaving Catherine his regent. Because her regency council was composed of sympathetic members, including her uncle, Thomas Cranmer, and Lord Hertford, Catherine obtained effective control and was able to rule as she saw fit. She handled provisions, finances, and musters for Henry's French campaign. She signed 5 royal proclamations and maintained constant contact with her lieutenant in the northern marches, Lord Shrewsbury, over the complex and unstable situation with Scotland. She kept Henry apprised of the good job she was doing. No queen since Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had been so involved with the running of the country. This was likely a trial run. Henry wasn't going to live much longer, and his son Edward was still a child. He would likely need a regent for a while. It is thought that her actions as regent, together with her strength of character and noted dignity and later religious convictions, greatly influenced her stepdaughter, Lady Elizabeth. Parr's second publication, Prayers or Meditations, appeared in June 1545, and like her first book, it was a bestseller. In this case, Parr's compositional method was a complex one, as she reworked another book that had been composed in Latin to produce a monologue spoken by a generic English Christian speaker. The volume also circulated in manuscript and deluxe print copies. Princess Elizabeth translated the work into Latin, Italian, and French as a New Year's gift for her father, King Henry VIII, and presented the manuscript in a beautiful hand-embroidered cover to him for Christmas of that year. The volume has been digitized by the British Library. To put it in perspective, Princess Elizabeth was 12 years old the year she had given that gift to her father. This is the future queen, and she was an impressive 12. The Queen's religious views were viewed by suspicion, with anti-Protestant officials such as Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, the Lord Worsley, the Lord Chancellor, and although brought up as a Catholic, she later became sympathetic and interested in the new faith of Protestantism. By the mid-1540s, she came under suspicion that she was actually a secret Lutheran. This view is supported by the strong Reformed ideas that she revealed after Henry's death, when her third book, Lamentation of a Sinner, was published in late 1547. But this was not an acceptable choice. Even for the leaders in the Church of England, who had also left the Catholic Church, leaving the Catholic Church was acceptable in England, but Lutheranism was too far. In 1546, the Bishop of Winchester and Lord Worsley tried to turn the king against her, and if I'm completely honest, that wasn't a hard job. Henry was on his 6th wife because he was easy to talk into things. His advisors knew that if they tried hard enough, they could fairly quickly turn the king against whoever his wife happened to be at the time. They'd done it before, and Catherine was perceived as a threat. An arrest warrant was drawn up for her, and rumors abound across Europe that the king was attracted to her close friend, the Duchess of Suffolk. He probably was. She, like her friend, was young and pretty and probably fairly charismatic. Henry regularly overindulged in the company of most women. However, someone leaked the warrant, and Catherine was made aware of the king's intentions, some court intrigue. So she went full defense and managed to reconcile with the king. She vowed that she had only ever argued about religion with him to take his mind off the suffering caused by his ulcerous leg. She knew that he liked discussing religion and was just trying to make him happy. She was just playing devil's advocate to entertain her husband. That was the spin, and he agreed that they could be friends again. He forgave her for what he saw as her mistake. He didn't care for opinionated wives. The following day, an armed guard who was unaware of the reconciliation tried to arrest her while she walked with the king. Henry played dumb, asking why he was there, shouting, "Knave, errant knave, beast and fool," and dismissed him. He was trying to send a couple of messages. One, to his wife, that he could have her arrested at any moment if she stepped out of line again. And one to his advisors, that he was able to change his mind any time. That was a king's prerogative. Shortly before he died, Henry made provision for an allowance of £7,000 per year for Catherine to support herself. He further ordered that after his death, Catherine, though a dowager queen, should be given the respect of a queen in England, as if he were still alive. And after the coronation of her stepson, Edward VI, on the 31st of January, 1547, Catherine retired from court to her home in Chelsea. The king is dead. Long live the king. Catherine signed her next couple of letters as Queen Regent. Not knowing that Henry had changed his will recently, changing the regent from her to his son's uncle Edward. Because again, his mind was easily changeable, and the Seymours wanted control of the government until little Edward reached his maturity and could rule on his own. Following Henry's death, Catherine's old love and the new king's other uncle, Thomas Seymour, now a baron, returned to court. Catherine was quick to accept when Seymour renewed his suit of marriage. Since only 4 months had passed since the death of King Henry, Seymour knew that the Regency Council would not agree to a petition for the Dowager Queen to marry so soon. She needed to at least pretend to be in deep mourning for the loss of her husband, the king. Sometime near the end of May, Catherine and Seymour married in secret. King Edward VI and the council were not informed of the union for several months. When their union became public knowledge, it caused a small scandal. The king and Lady Mary were very much displeased by the union. After being censured and reprimanded by the council, Seymour wrote to Lady Mary asking her to intervene on his behalf. Mary became furious at his forwardness and tasteless actions and refused to help. Mary even went as far as asking her half-sister, Lady Elizabeth, not to interact with Queen Catherine any further. During this time, Catherine began having altercations with her brother-in-law, Edward Seymour, a duke and the regent of his nephew. A rivalry developed between Catherine and Edward's wife, her own former lady-in-waiting, Anne Seymour, which became particularly acute over the matter of Catherine's jewels. The Duchess argued that Catherine, as Dowager Queen, was no longer entitled to wear the jewels belonging to the wife of the king. Instead, she, as the wife of the regent, should be the one to wear them. The whole ordeal left her relationship with Catherine permanently damaged. The relationship between the two Seymour brothers had worsened as a result, since Thomas saw the whole dispute as a personal attack by his brother on his social standing. Edward thought his brother was just attempting to social climb, and if I'm honest, I think he probably was. When she was 35, Catherine published her third book, Lamentation of a Sinner. The book promoted the Protestant concept of justification by faith alone, which the Catholic Church deemed to be heresy. It is unlikely that she developed these views in the short time between Henry's death and the publication of the book. In 1544 or 1545, Parr had started to organize an English translation of Erasmus' paraphrases upon the New Testament, and the massive volume was finally printed in January 1548. Parr had enlisted others, including her stepdaughter, Mary Tudor, to translate different sections, and she may have produced the paraphrase of Matthew. King Edward ordered every parish to obtain a copy, and many generations of literate parishioners would have encountered lengthy dedications praising Parr's learning for her commitment to the vernacular Bible and her role in the English Reformation. Parr owned many books, and she participated in the cultural practice of writing in her books and signing books that belonged to others. Her household consisted of her stepdaughter Elizabeth and Elizabeth's cousin, Lady Jane Grey, both of whom will have episodes, and her husband, Thomas Seymour. At the age of 35, Catherine became pregnant. This pregnancy was a surprise, as Catherine had not conceived during her first 3 marriages. During this time, Seymour began to take interest in Lady Elizabeth. Seymour had reputedly plotted to marry her before marrying Catherine. Because his brother was probably right, he was likely using royal women and girls to social climb. This is the old fourth son story. He would need to make his own way. It was reported later that Catherine discovered the two in an embrace. On a few occasions, before the situation risked getting completely out of hand, according to the deposition of Cat Ashley, Elizabeth's governess, Catherine appears to not only have acquiesced in episodes of horseplay, but actually to have assisted her husband. Whatever actually happened, Elizabeth was sent away in May 1548 to stay with Sir Anthony Denny's household at Cheshire, and never saw her beloved stepmother again, although the two did correspond. Warned that any male dalliances could put her in danger, she probably was given the Catherine Howard story. Shamed and scared into not wanting male attention, her reputation was important to keep her life. Elizabeth immediately wrote a letter to the Queen and Seymour after she left Chelsea. The letter demonstrates a sort of remorse. In June 1548, Catherine was accompanied by Lady Jane Grey and moved to Sudley Castle in Gloucestershire. The Dowager Queen promised to provide education for her. It was there that Catherine would spend the last few months of her pregnancy and the last summer of her life. Catherine gave birth to her only child, a daughter, Mary Seymour, named after Catherine's stepdaughter Mary, on the 30th of August, 1548. Catherine died on the 5th of September, 1548, at Sudley Castle, from what is thought to have been childbed fever. This illness was common due to the lack of hygiene around childbirth, but Catherine had accused her husband of withholding medical care. If that is true, then that is awful. And based on what I have learned about both Catherine and Thomas's personalities, I believe that she was telling the truth. Catherine's funeral was held on the 7th of September, 1548. It was the first Protestant funeral held in English. Her chief mourner was Lady Jane Grey. She was buried in St. Mary's Chapel on the grounds of Sudley Castle, Gloucestershire, England. Cat Ashley had developed a crush on Seymour during her time at Chelsea and encouraged her charge to play along. At one point, she even made a comment about how lucky Elizabeth would have been to have had a husband like Seymour. Ashley even told Lady Elizabeth that Seymour had confided his sentiments to her of wanting to marry Elizabeth before Catherine. After Catherine's death, Ashley strongly encouraged Elizabeth to write Seymour, offering condolences to comfort him of his sorrow, for he would think great kindness therein. Thomas plotted to marry Lady Jane Grey to King Edward VI, and for him to marry the young Princess Elizabeth, who by this point was still only 16. And hopefully he could overthrow his brother as Lord Protector. He was arrested for breaking into the young king's room with a loaded pistol. Not the smartest move. He was attempting a kidnapping of his nephew, and in the process shot his dog to keep it quiet. Thomas Seymour was beheaded for treason, making baby Mary Seymour an orphan at not yet 2 years old. She was taken to live with the Dowager Duchess of Suffolk, a close friend of her mother's. Catherine's other jewels were kept in a coffer with 5 drawers at Sudley, and this was sent to the Tower of London on the 20th of April, 1549, and her clothes and papers followed in May. After a year and a half, on the 17th of March, 1550, Mary's property was restored to her by an Act of Parliament, easing the burden of the infant's household on the Duchess. The last mention of Mary Seymour on record is her 2nd birthday. And although stories circulated that she eventually married and had children, most historians believe she died as a child at Grimthorpe Castle in Lincolnshire. And this is where we will leave it for this week. What did you think of Catherine Parr? She is the survivor, the final wife of Henry VIII, and I think she survived by watching the women that came before her. If Henry hadn't died, I think she would have been in danger at some point. But she was clever and good at pacifying the king, so I don't know. I don't, however, think King Henry was her worst husband. For me, that honor goes to Thomas Seymour. You can share your thoughts with me at Long Live the Queen Podcast at gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with friends. If you hated it, share with enemies. Long live to all the queens out there, and until next week, bye.